Welcome, everybody, to the Quiet Part Out Loud podcast. I'm Alex.
And I'm Nuvyn.
And today you're joining us for a couple of firsts. We have our first international guest and our first live recording. So without further ado, please welcome Managing Director and co-founder of RRA Artemis, Hetty Pye.
Thank you very much. No pressure on this being live.
No pressure.
So take us back into the Artemis journey. You know, what inspired its creation? What were the gaps that you saw in the marketplace and that led to its formation?
RRA Artemis, so first of all, Russell Reynolds. Our focus is on board and CEO progression, development, and ultimately selection. And we're the market leaders in work of that kind, and we take our responsibilities as market leader pretty seriously. And as we reflected, by dint of changes in corporate governance, as well as the work ourselves and others have done, we have helped reshape the constitution of boardrooms around the world. But if you look at the statistics and what we looked at and knew to be true, but found them to be even more stark when you looked at them harder, is that actually the statistics around women CEOs is stuck. So if you look at the major indices around the world, about 1 in 10 only of sitting CEOs as a post that's held by a woman. And the pipeline is relatedly quite sticky. Mm-hmm. So we took our responsibility really seriously and said, well, what can we do about that, given that this is a topic that's not going to be new to anyone around this room or anywhere else on your podcast? How do we get after something that's been true to a reasonable degree since the dawn of time? And it's not that there's some grand master plan why this isn't happening, but clearly lots of different initiatives have not got into this problem and got to solve it. So specifically, we decided, well, what are we best at? We're best at finding CEOs and board members for businesses. And could we think about how we could just reframe the question to get to a completely higher quality answer? And if you think our responsibility is to try and drive and deliver the greatest range and depth of choice of leader, if we're ignoring 50% of the population to a degree and not utilizing that as a capability, then what were we about? Then in addition, we actually, was some talk in the conversation in the breakout room I was just in before. COVID was quite a revealer as well, and that's how Artemis also came born out. When we looked at actually leadership around the world, particularly actually from more of a political hue, and noticed that actually in a world that was even more chaotic than normal, that we found that there were a lot of women leaders who seemed to be leading with more purpose and clarity and decisiveness, potentially, than some of their male counterparts. So that was the original genesis of the conversation, but plenty more besides.
So what does Artemis seek to pull out of its participants, and how are you building that talent pipeline that is so critical when we think about CEO transition and succession planning?
So first of all, the reframing of the question has been essential to Artemis and where we found a real unlock. Because with our clients every day, we're looking at organizations and saying, what's your strategy and looking out longer term, and how does that translate into the leadership competencies that you know therefore are actually required to deliver that strategy, not the ones that you presume might be the case? As soon as you start asking the question like that, you start to unlock a different level of competency. We know as a business what true progressive leadership competencies look like, are the best-in-class CEOs, and you start to attach those two things together. And when you reframe that question, you find that actually there's a massive unlock for female leaders. So without being unduly gender stereotypical, but we do have data that perfectly bears this out, is that we do know that there are some ace cards that our women leaders could and should be playing that are truly critical leadership competencies in the context of solving for today's leadership challenges, as well as at the same time acknowledging that we do live in an imperfect and complicated world, so it's not a naivety attached to that. There's also in addition, there are some bear traps out there, whether you're a man or a woman stepping up to be CEO. But there are a few more and a few deeper ones if you're a woman. So how do you know about those, think about them, and make sure that you can navigate those at the same time? Mm-hmm. So it's positivity, amplification, understanding your ace cards from a leadership point of view on the one hand, but on the other also knowing the things that you may need to just understand, know better, and navigate with more purpose.
So RRA Artemis is not your typical leadership program. What's kind of the secret sauce, or, tell us all your secrets about?
Wow. I've got a few cupboards. So the secret sauce of Artemis, so let's just explain a little bit more perhaps about what it constitutes. So Marnie mentioned Artemis is a movement, and it's a movement of change. So we're trying to deliver this systemic change into long-term talent succession processes, period. Mm-hmm. That's actually for women, but more broadly for choice. That's its objective. But if you look at the program we've built specifically, we consider it effectively our crown jewel. It's our insight generator, it's our drive for impact, and it's delivering impact. So its difference is, it is a CEO accelerator program built on our expertise as experts in that area and what we know to be true of those capabilities I talked about that are true for progressive CEOs. But it's also then, it's the application of the theoretical, the insight with the real and with the access. And I think the real secret sauce is, whilst we have got validity of data, we have access to world leaders and who will come and talk to you about their personal leadership journeys and our own leadership faculty of capability. On top of that, doesn't remain in the theoretical. The critical secret sauce for us is a so what. So what does that mean for me? So what, how do I lead differently? So what does it mean in the ecosystem? So what does it mean in the company that I work for today or another one that I might represent? It's made a real difference. And just to give you a statistic, I started talking about hoping, wishing, all sorts of quite, may I say, Artemis, I've made it into an adjective, Artemis-style adjectives. As a woman leader myself, I now know, beyond hope, I know, and it is going to happen. So I give you a statistic from the first program. 25% of the women executives that attended our first program, 25% of them were promoted to CEO or in service within their top team of becoming the next CEO within the lifetime of the first program. Typically, you look at a statistic like that, it might be low single digits. So we know that we're driving for impact and we are going to change the face of CEO leadership at some of the biggest companies in the world.
And can you tell us some real stories about a specific leader organization that would demonstrate, why this program is so important?
Yes, happily. So if I think every single leader that's gone on our program, and now we have a second cohort going through, but let's talk about the ones who've had the experience already. All of them walked out of there and said, I feel like I have a better understanding of what it truly means to be CEO, more clarity and reasons as to why I want it and how I'm going to do it, and I've got a much clearer path on how to get there. And there was one individual who's been promoted. She works in a big financial services institution. She had come second in the CEO selection process prior to an external candidate. She looked around the room and said, in the program, do you know what? I've reflected on myself. I shouldn't have given me the job either. But then she was promoted within the lifetime of this program to be the next CEO after the current one. And she put it, I thought, really well and really simply. She said, I've become more determined, more deliberate, and I am demonstrating more. And if I have to think about three qualities, if I were to try and impart some wisdom from Artemis, those are three things that have really struck me as a kind of quite a good moniker for the program. And she was a person who started looking at this saying to me, is this a women for women's thing? I'm not sure it's my thing. I came out second, so is this my consolation prize? She arrived with a degree of potentially appropriate skepticism, but ended up leaving with a completely different perspective.
And so in your research on women CEOs globally, what patterns or biases have emerged, or what stands out to you, or what have you noticed along the way that kind of led to the creation of Artemis?
So, as you can imagine, we're really careful, and appropriately so, to not get to make sure that we don't sound like we're being gender stereotypical. That would be self-defeating and just not a good plan. But we do have a load of data, this is, which reinforces my point around the ACE cards and capabilities. I'll give you a good example. There's two linked things, which is around, let's start with the word impact. So we run a thing called a Global Leadership Monitor Survey, and we've run it for years. We run it every quarter, about 11,000 people complete it, and intentionally we look at a cross-section from CEOs, ExCo, through to high potentials, and it's across the BRIC economy, so it's a really good data set. If you look at the data that just came out this quarter, and you look at what are the primary motivations of people wanting to stay within organizations, it's more than money today is being usurped by the fact that you want to feel that your organization's got value, purpose, and is there for a positive impact. You then take that up to female leaders, and whilst again I don't want to draw undue generalizations, I can tell you with empirical evidence that statistically they're far more commonly going to tell you their primary motivation is to deliver impact. So there's an immediate correlation. And then if you take it one step further, and I get into a bit more sort of leadership technical speak with you, we have a leadership competency that we've developed recently over the past really 5 years has come to the fore, which is what we call multi-systems thinking. And multi-systems thinking is all about impact, right? Because it's your ability to join the dots. It's when now, as we think about an increasingly complicated world, you've got to think about your government, your regulator, your customer, your employee, your board, you name it. It's coming at you, and they're probably all relevant, but it's quite hard to work out how those dots join up. But if you're driven for impact, you're more likely to be a multi-systems thinker, more likely able to be able to draw all of that data together and all of those opinions and synthesize that into the best decisions on behalf of your company. So that's one really good example, backed up by a couple of other things which have come out around, for example, and it was mentioned in just one of the breakouts I was in before, is if you look at, again, on our Global Leadership Monitor survey, if you look at how men and women executives are evaluated by their peers. If you put in, which we did, all of our progressive leadership competencies that we know to be true, and asked men and women to evaluate their peers according to those competencies, there's basically negligible difference in how you get rated, men or women, leaders, across the vast majority of those competencies. But there are two where one gender outscores the other consistently, and they both happen to be in favor of women. One is around, and I suspect this won't surprise you, but it is empirically borne out, is one around fostering and driving for innovation. So more likelihood to be what we would call vulnerable, an ability to not have all the answers when no one can, and therefore get more from the group, is one critical one. And the other one is related, is driving greater levels of people development and talent development. Again, in a world where you've got, people are your fundamental assets, whatever happens to technology, another absolutely critical component if you really want to lead successfully.
I know our Artemis has done some research around how female leaders are perceived and the undue expectations that are put on them. Can you speak a little bit about how female leaders, female CEOs are treated differently?
So whenever I talk about Artemis, I hope you can tell it's imbued with positivity, an opportunity. And when we leave together in terms of this conversation, I genuinely want to leave you with a sense of hope and optimism, and not because I'm being naive, because I can see it's real. And in a world where you might see a whole bunch of gloomy messages out there, there's some really good stuff to take out of this around how I think something really good is coming forward. That said, you have to frame the conversation. So we've done that as well. This is my segue onto some stuff that's perhaps not so pretty. So we decided that we would commission a really extensive piece of research, which we got an external party to support us in. So through a 6-month period, the second half of last year, we looked at over 200,000 news articles, looking at reviewing women executives and CEOs and male CEOs across the major indices in the world and across all major publications across a really good data set. And the data that comes out of that is compelling, and you could say sort of compellingly, in some parts, scary or dreadful, something not good. But what it does, and the reason why we went for that was because if we take that the media can be seen at least to be a relative proxy for societal opinion, then at least you may as well know what the opinions are, however unintentionally propagated, if at least you can then explain to people this is the way the prism is being shown and recognize that prism is necessarily skewed, you get to a point where you can get to somewhere positive around starting what we call changing the conversation of boardrooms, changing the conversation with the media, not to seek to fight them, but to seek to embrace them and have a different conversation. So to bring it to life in terms of some of the specifics, but again, also we thought about this to help prepare and support women CEOs when they do step up to this role. A few things. So one perhaps really striking piece was, there are two things perhaps I'll mention. First is what we call the confidence and ambition double bind. Mm-hmm. So we found that women versus their male counterparts are 2 times more likely to be critiqued as either underconfident or overconfident. Same goes with ambition. So it's under, over. There's this perennially oscillating bar. You can never jump on it. You're over or you're under. So in our scenario, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You can't achieve that. So it's just look at in terms of adjectives, very difficult to achieve. The other piece is around, if you look about departures around women CEOs and male CEOs. So there is 2 times the press attention to a woman CEO departing, and is 2 times more likely to be negative in tone around that departure, whatever the circumstance of their departure.
On the confidence and ambition stats, how would you counsel or advise women who are aspiring to that CEO if it's either over or under. You're either too much or not enough. Makes me feel like you just can't win.
That's what I mean. I don't want to make Artemis into this sense sort of we all leave feeling gloomy and what are we doing about it? So absolutely. So if you go back to our program, for example, the middle section, it's a 4-part year-long experience. 3 of them are in person. The first one's virtual and preparatory. The middle one is called Getting to the Top. I like to sometimes relabel it Playing the Game, because that actually really winds up the audience. Because it's deemed to be political or something a bit unsavory, which, again, without being too unduly stereotypical, women tend to steer away from more than men. It doesn't quite solve for your confidence and ambition thing, but it is a related point. Is that if I think consistently, every single CEO who's sponsored, therefore they're women, they happen to all be men, women executives who've gone on Artemis thus far, their 360 feedback has obviously necessarily been varied and wide. But one thing they're consistent every time was they need to show up more. Okay, so what does that mean?
Right.
So if we think about that in that context, is typically I would say it's more the under than the over you get in terms of critique. But actually back on this Playing the Game. So for us, there are I'll give you 2 pieces that come out of the program. One is just thinking about your stakeholder universe. A lot of women think, and again, Marnie was, I think, just referring to this in the last breakout I was in, more commonly than men will think, if I just do a really good job and probably do more work than a lot of other people, that will show meritocracy will shine, and off I go. Well, I can tell you to be a CEO, in fact, some of the things that people deem to be just good work are meritocratic. I'm not saying it's not a meritocracy that doesn't make you CEO, but there are different skills and approaches that you need. And actually, I would argue 50% of what you do as CEO has no determinable outcome. It's all about influence. So if you then change your vista and think, okay, how am I going to build relationships with my stakeholder universe, my board, or people more senior than me, and how are they going to know about me, how are they going to see me, is actually building a level of relationship and influence so that way before the fact they ever start to talk about you, they have seen you, they do know you, and they don't just make assumptions about you that you are under, over, whatever that confidence, ambition aspect might be. That's a real key one in terms of a learning. Then there's one other aspect I would say, which I don't know if this will resonate with the room. It really has resonated with our groups in our Artemis programs. There's the things that intentionally going to slightly wind you up as well, because they're hopefully a bit memorable, right? Which is, and this is then thinking about things that women can do for themselves. And let me be clear, this is not about women fixing themselves scenario. That's really not what we're talking about at all. But around giving yourself the space to potentially do more. As you've come up with this concept of doing versus overdoing. And we do find that a lot of women executives, and certainly on our programs, have come forward and they overdo things which are seriously laudable things, like trust, loyalty, belief in the system, focus on your own self-development, personal accountability bleeding into culpability. All things that are, in their own, really great things. But when overdone, then you are not necessarily seen so much because you're so busy doing and you don't free yourself up the time if you just did them versus overdoing them to be able to do some of the stakeholder management and other relationship and influencing pieces, which, as I say, isn't a political game. It's just an intelligent strategy. How are people supposed to know more about you if you don't communicate it?
So if we take the onus off of the individual and put it on the organization, what are some actions or some takeaways that an organization who wants to change their succession planning, what can they do?
There's loads that can be done. So this is what we put under the kind of under our banner of what we call changing the conversation. Because actually, first of all, attitudinally, I can tell you really happily, despite all of the rhetoric that's out there. In fact, we have received no critique or complaint on what we're seeking to do, despite being out there in a kind of quite public forum. And we have found lots of appetite and receptivity of what we're doing from our clients. So actually, more commonly, people are coming to us going, I kind of know this matters. Of course, I want a better range and choice of leader. I just don't know how to get there. And I've tried these things and haven't necessarily worked. So there are some specific fundamentals. One is really being clear, which may sound so obvious, but actually not so many organizations are so good at, which is back to my point earlier around what's the success profile for the leader of this business and ultimately for the CEO of it? Not to answer the needs of the organization today, but where it's going. Because if your organizations try to answer the needs of just today, you probably won't have an organization in 5 to 10 years' time. The speed of change that we're all experiencing, that's probably true. So critically, let's focus on, therefore, the capabilities that are going to need to drive the success of this business for the long term, and use that as your lens for development and get after it early. That will, without question, open the aperture in terms of the types of people you look at, men or women, gender agnostic, but it will probably allow for more women to get in the mix. There's then something else which sounds so simple, but again, when applied, super successful, which is adopting a different methodology to the whole succession planning ethos and methodology within a business. So make it an opt-out methodology, not an opt-in. Just by changing a word makes such a difference, because it means that it assumes that everyone is invited to the conversation until the time they decide they don't want to be, rather than requiring them to put their hand up or say that they are or be identified. Makes a big difference. And then if you really want to drive in terms of female leadership, and we think about where do CEOs come from, also, again, the data is overwhelming. They are almost certainly, well, much more likely to be a P&L leader. But there are, however, in my world, I come from the UK and the FTSE, it's like 25% of executives, of women executives are holding a P&L title around that top leadership table, for example. So really start to think about your distribution of your P&L roles early and well, and at significant scale, for example. CFO is the second one after that. In North America, you have COOs more common than they do in the UK, so maybe that's also another route. But actually, as it happens, yes, whilst we'd all like functional leadership of other kinds to generate CEOs, at the moment, that's not where organizations are placing their bets, so make sure you put your bets into the right jobs.
We have some interesting questions coming up online, and one of or on our screens here. One of them is about the evolution of a traditional career path from that corporate ladder to a bit of that corporate lattice, or the person wrote here, the squiggly career, and I like that word for it. Are you finding more women within that talent pipeline and that CEO pipeline coming from traditional corporate ladder? We've moved up the ranks of our professional journey, or has that career path been a little more ambiguous?
Statistically, yeah, I think you could probably say that there is more of squiggles, zigzags that you may see in career choices. Also because, again, without overly generalizing, women tend to be driven more by interest and impact, right? The two things together, not necessarily what's going to get me there. So it's around aggregation of skills, interest, knowledge, because in service of impact, right? And contribution. But that's also, again, back on our race card scenario, is something that's coming your way that's of value. Because today, if you work up a certain narrow funnel, which might have got you success in the past, is actually almost certainly not going to get you the same level of success in the future. Actually, dexterity is your friend, and range of experience is your friend. So I would say what has potentially been that spaghetti, zigzag, whatever, squiggle, that might have been harder for other people to understand and be able to compute and therefore evaluate in the past, I think it's really changing now, and very soon will become to your advantage.
You mentioned ACE cards, so I'll use this question. What are some other ACE card examples you've seen in CEOs?
Well, again, this is, Marnie was touching on this in the breakout I was just part of, and it was a general discussion. If we step right up, the word transformation, I think, is almost done today in leadership. And why? Because it's a statement. It's reality. It's not a change to then stability. It's just constant change. So I think everyone accepting that's the backdrop to leadership, period, man or woman, doesn't matter, wherever you are in an organization, that's true. With ever more information, correct or information, ever more plethora of stakeholders coming towards you, you've got a wall of things heading towards you at any given time. So back on an ACE card bit, and this goes back to the squiggles as well, is your ability to, and back on the impact point, the multi-systems point, it's your ability to have that dexterity and agility of leadership to be able to pick out the salient pieces. And actually, I was some CEOs have been on the Artemis program talking to our cohorts. One of them said something really interesting. She said, first of all, she said what Russell Reynolds used to say, which is when you become CEO, you're probably going to apply an 80-20 rule to information, and you've got to make decisions in a relative, not in a vacuum, but it's an 80-20 type of thing, and you've just got to get comfortable with that. She said she thought when she became CEO, maybe it was therefore probably a If she was lucky on a good day, a 70-30 or down to a 60-40. But she said, you know what, my real lived experience is probably quite often it's a 51-49 call. And just accept that's the call you're making, but make the decision and move on from there. So as a guide and thinking about that, that's certainly a real secret sauce, I'd say, of CEOs. Now, of course, you hope you make more 51-49ers than 41-51s, but certainly something to pay attention to.
What tactics have you seen women use to advocate for themselves in getting that promotion? Maybe not to CEO, maybe to CEO, but getting that promotion or level up.
So we do find that back on focusing on doing the work, doing good work, getting your head down, making sure you're kind of acing every single part of your assignment, that women very more commonly will say to us, I don't have time. I don't have time for the other stuff that might be about me, when actually it's not really about you. Because it's assumed that that's a sort of selfish thing to say. It's actually about you becoming an even better executive and helping contribute further to the organization. And what do I mean by that? I mean around networks, for example. So this is a really good example, but it's a really good idea. So we do find that, and I would say a good piece of advice is get in early on who's your advisory board. And you may need to replenish and update what we call your informal advisory board on a 2, 3, 4 year basis. But who's helping you? Because your best friend will probably tell you you're great, or when you need to, change your hairstyle or something helpful. And they may well give you some good career advice, but they may not always be the constant. They'll always be your champion, but will they give you the advice that you need? So seek out people within your organization or indeed outside that you find are actually going to give you additional perspectives on yourself, your career, on your business, so that you expand the possibilities that you can bring back to your business and expand your own horizons around what it means. And then internally, as I touched on before, don't see it as a dirty word that I'm trying to make sure that the board member's likely, or whoever it is, the person that's, a level or two up from you. What's the harm in saying, hey, Alex, I'd like to chat to you about, when you were me, can I find, half an hour for a cup of coffee? Most people actually like being asked for their help. It's not seen as that you're being improper or pushy and words like that sometimes can be put our way. I don't think that. I think you've got more license for maneuver than you probably think.
There's an interesting, it may have been actually on our podcast, and a leader we were interviewing was talking about forming your own kind of board of directors for your life. And what are those roles around your board table that you need to help guide your professional journey? Can you speak to a little bit about that, and what types of experiences should you be seeking when kind of forming your own personal board?
That's exactly it. So it's never too early to start, as well as something I'd say. So let's go back to some of that conversation we were just having earlier about if you then do step up to be in that CEO role and that media spotlight. Well, as an example, don't start with that just the minute it's suddenly to come relevant. You'll go on media training, which might be the level before that, right? Early doors in your career. I'm not saying you suddenly build a relationship with a bunch of different journalists, but at least have an appreciation of how the media really works. And why not have some friendships in there around sort of insight generation and or just observations around how that sphere works, as an example. Then think about, and therefore, what does that mean with regards to how you're perceived, what you want to be known for? And again, this is not a self-promotion statement. It's just a question of intelligent thought process around what you stand for and what that means from an early stage. And don't forget as well, the higher up you go, the higher levels of scrutiny. So you want to make sure that you also probably are saying and communicating the right kind of things earlier than you think might be necessary, is one example. Then some of it's obviously highly contextual around, let's say you've spent your life or your career so far within one organization or organizations that do quite similar things. Try and reach out to people that do something that's fundamentally different to you, so that you've got a different perspective. And you will find, and that's one of the really fun things about Artemis, is actually your shared experience will be far more, the consistency between you will be far greater than the inconsistency, which can give you further confidence, but it'll also give you some additional ideas that you didn't necessarily have. And then I would say it's then think about yourself. So with a level of self-awareness, which is absolutely your friend in your ability to move up, know about the things you're not so good at, and how can you make sure that you've got people within your ecosystem, within that advisory board, who can fill in those gaps for you. If you're terrified about, which I think probably most of us are, around what's happening in the world of AI and what's its real implications for me, for example, how can you go and find out and make sure that you're going to be a little bit ahead potentially of other people because you've bothered to go and find out more, and someone's helping you think about that in the context of your career.
I really like this question. We've talked about it before. becoming CEO hasn't even entered my mind as a possibility in my career. And we've talked before about, there is this swath of women that might be stepping back or see the scale and volume of work that's required of these senior leaders. So how do you convince yourself to make those steps? Or do you just know, like, I'm not cut out for that? Is that a piece of the confidence? Is there some convincing involved? Do you see women kind of talking themselves into it?
Or out.
Does that look like?
Yes, and I'd say more commonly, it's a conversations with themselves or with others rather than, it requires conversation. Whether you decide to go for it or not, more commonly, I would say, with women executives. That's making me think a couple of things. So at the commencement of our Artemis program, we had a lady come and talk to us who had come second in an internal, very big CEO succession contention. She then left the business and then she changed sector, geography, and was a woman CEO of a business with 15 men in her senior leadership team. And she gave us her perspectives, 2 years the other side. She came up with a really interesting way to describe her career, which might help with that question. She said, as things moved along and opportunities appeared, rather than thinking why, I said, why not? Why not? Why not? Why can't I do that? Why not? Why isn't that interesting? Why not? Why not? Why not try it? What's the worst that can happen? I decide I don't like it and I go and do something different. It sounds, again, super simple, but actually was quite liberating for her. She had not started her life out thinking, hey, I'm going to be, she was an engineer who went she was born in Tunisia, went to the States and then went out into working in Africa the first part of her career, and certainly wasn't on her mind that that's where she was going to end up, for example. So that's something that comes to mind. And the other is perhaps a thing to also hold in your mind, which might be helpful, is, and particularly as a woman, again, another woman CEO said this to me, which she expressed her career journey and her thought process of being a woman and a woman leader. She said when she was early in her career, and I don't know if that's true for the person that asked the question, or for some of you it may well be true, that she said she led in spite of being a woman. As she got more senior, she led because she was a woman. She wanted to show and sort of defend her situation. And now she said she leads as a woman. So don't think the prism also that where you find yourself doesn't have to be your reality. And what I mean by that is that why can't you lead in your own way and don't have to be as defined by some of the people and the characteristics around you. If indeed, again, you've got an organization, you can start at least in your own area, start to get the conversation about and the perspective from a development and training perspective around, well, what are we actually trying to solve for? Not do we think we know what good has historically looked like.
Based on your research into leadership and perceptions and the expectations of a leader, what needs to evolve around our own understanding of leadership in order for that to be seen as a sustainable career path? We've talked a lot throughout the day about trade-offs and one's career journeys and compromises and fears and shortage of doubts and some people saying, you know what, I don't know if it's worth it. But does some of that have to do with our own expectations that we put upon our leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, more women CEOs who've made it even that far, got to that in that sort of unusual category will say, hey, actually quite interesting that, again, governed by different perspectives and impacts. So for them, it's not all about the end game of getting that top job. So do they want to repeat history and do it twice? Maybe not. Maybe less so than men, because they're like, hey, that was fun. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff I'd like to do and other things that I'd like to contribute to. So there is some of that. But I think on the expectations, I think there is undeniably a level of pressure and focus and visibility that you can't deny. But back on my point around leading for yourself, though, and in your own way, and I think there is still a lot of license for maneuver to do it your way. On the Artemis program, we are introducing this time around the concept of what's not the hero's journey, but the heroine's journey, which is actually over time, is you start out where you start to put layer upon layer potentially around kind of the may not be armory, but they're kind of different aspects you put around yourself to feel kind of prepared and ready to go forward in what you need to do and make yourself feel comfortable enough. But actually, if you get more senior, it's about discarding those layers. And actually, I know it's an overused term today, but authenticity, there ain't no substitute for that. And actually, your ability, therefore, to lead with your authentic self, driven by impact, with that multi-systems thinking capability, you have an opportunity to lead differently. So you don't have to necessarily live to the... It doesn't mean the expectations are different, but it does mean the way you choose to show up is different, which I think can help with your ability to manage the stress and the environment. So I'll give you a really good example. On our media research work that we did, when we had was moderating a panel with 2 former women CEOs and a journalist, one of the chief protagonists previously of some of this data. And one of the former women CEOs said, it was a really good way, again, of totally reframing the point. She said, actually, on the media side, I'd made a decision to befriend the media, not shun them early doors before I even became CEO. And she was running a trading business, so kind of with a reasonably tough lens. And she said, actually, I built a different set of relationships, and I used to my advantage that I was different. I was more newsworthy. Everyone did want to talk to me because I was a woman CEO. So use it and work it. And she said, I found it to my advantage, because I'm like, great, I get to tell you more about my company because you asked me more times about it. So again, turn the tables and turn it in a different way rather than feeling like it's put on you. Just take the advantage and change it. Flip it around 180.
Right.
Maybe to wrap up, looking out 5 or 10 years, what gives you hope about the next generation of leaders, the next generation of women leaders?
Well, loads. Hopefully I've managed to give you some confidence around the capabilities that no doubt sit in this room, which are perfectly in service of this ever more complicated, dynamic world that ain't going to stop spinning over the next 5, 10, 15 generation years in front of us. So that's for sure. And I think something also to leave you with a real sense of optimism. The Artemis colors are purple and gold. And I like the gold because purple's my second favorite color. But gold, I like it because it shines and it's bright. And I think about Artemis, it shines light in corners that were dark. And once it's there, it's warm and it's fighting, and you can stay there. So my experience, despite the fact that we're talking to, in a world where the rhetoric has changed a lot since we launched Artemis, is actually the receptivity to what we're doing remains the same. I'd say it's even been doubled down and renewed. And we're not talking to purely an audience that wants to be benign and supportive of us. We're going out there talking to organizations we had no relationship with before, and they are seriously up for what Artemis entails. So I think you'll find there is more interest in rethinking the leadership paradigm than might appear to the immediate eye.
I love that. Rethinking the leadership paradigm. That should be our theme for next year's Leadership Forum. You heard it here first on the Quiet Part Out Loud. Thank you so much for joining us today, Hetty. It's been a great discussion, and we look forward to following the journey of Artemis.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
The Quiet Part Out Loud is produced by Access Connects and brought to you by... Oh wait, is there a sponsorship opportunity there? Learn more at accessconnects.com.